Great. Yep. Thanks, Sarah. So we generally meet at the Dialogues Cafe in Koramangala, and ever since COVID happened, we have been meeting online. And yeah, so the topic for today will be political fiction. Before we get there, do you like to introduce yourselves? Generally, we go around introducing ourselves with a few words. So maybe I'll start with myself. So I'm Anand. I work as a product manager, and I'm not doing that. I like reading, and I've been a regular at Dialogues with Books for the last 1.5 years. So that's me. Who wants to go next? Pooja? Pooja, I think you're on mute.
I think I can go next. Hey everyone, Vibhor here. I'm joining this group for the first time. I look forward to having a conversation with all of you guys. Yeah. I'm based out of Gurgaon, by the way.
Thanks, Vibhor.
Pooja, you can go now.
It may seem that it's not your mic is on mute, but rather your device hasn't allowed connection to the Zoom yet.
Okay. So meanwhile, yeah, Vaidehi, you want to go next?
So hi everyone, my name is Vaidehi. So the thing was, I used to be a very avid reader, and then there was the slump when a lot of other things started happening. So that's why I started coming to Dialogues with Books to get recommendations, to kind of be in that environment, and it has really helped. I think my reading habit has picked up since I started all these, so I'm really glad about that.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
Is it okay if I go next?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm currently a student. I'm based in Bombay, and I really enjoy reading. I'm more of a poetry person, but I love fiction as well. And I currently find myself in a slump, like where he said. So I'm super excited to get some conversation that will encourage me to get out of this slump.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
I think I'll go for next.
Yeah.
So hi guys, I'm Harish Yadav. I run a tech startup, and I've been reading for as many years as I could remember. And I've also been part of the book club circuit. I was a part of book club circuit in Bangalore when I was in Bangalore, and then I moved to Bangalore. Now I'm part of a couple of book clubs. So I always love getting to meet with people who are avid readers like myself. We got to share not only the book recommendation, but also our perspectives on books and the stories and lives. So lovely to be here and excited to get to know you all and hopefully have some fun conversation.
Thanks, Harish. So where are you located now?
I'm in Gurgaon now.
Gurgaon, okay. Great. Thanks for joining.
Hi, may I go next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Riya, and I love reading. I also I haven't read political fiction to be specific, but I like fiction, and but I just can't get myself into reading a lot. So that's where I think I lack. And yeah, this is a break in my career. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, next.
Yeah.
Hi guys. My name is Mohammed Fahim. I'm from Bangalore. I'm working in electronics, and I've been reading for a long time. Usually, I do not read fiction, and this is the first time I'm joining you guys. Looking forward to meet you all. Right now, I'm reading Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. So it would be really great to get your recommendations. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. So how's the book, by the way? How do you find it?
It's like a little technical, but I like it. It's not like reading a story or anything. There are a lot of technical jargons and a lot of explanation. It's like textbook, but still it's worth it. I like it.
Right.
Hi, can I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. My name is Shri. I'm a master's student from Manipal. I actually lived in Bangalore for a while as well during undergrad. And yeah, so this is my first time here as well. And I've been reading for a very long time, primarily fiction. But yeah, political fiction is not something that I've read a few times. Like political fiction-ish is books that I've read, like quite a few books that I've read. So yeah, I'm quite excited to like get into the genre, so to speak. Yeah.
Thanks, Sri.
So maybe I'll go next. Hi guys, I'm Sirisha, and I came across Dialogues with Books maybe like a year or two ago. So this is how almost every session goes. So there's a topic, and I kind of prepare myself to discuss maybe over like one or two books, and then I always end up taking so many recommendations and with such great insights from the session. So I think I'm just looking forward to that in today's session as well.
Yep. Thanks, Sirisha. So that's what everyone is looking forward to also. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go next if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
So hey, this is Shovit. So I'm a designer working with Postman currently, and I'm based out of Bangalore, and I have not. So I just like Vaidehi, I used to be a reader, but for a very long time I have not been able to read properly because of a lot of things happening around. So yeah, I mean, now I feel this is the time that I get back to it again, and I do love politics. So that's kind of the thing that sort of triggered my intention to join this meeting. So yeah, I'm also looking forward to have a lot of recommendations at the end of the meeting for sure.
Thanks, Shobit.
Hey guys, is my mic fixed now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, hi everyone. This is Pooja here. So I have been associated with Dialogue with books for close to a year now, I think. And I do make it a point to always be reading something or other so that I don't put the habit aside, the hobby aside. Presently, I'm reading very close to finishing a very thick book called Parva, which is, in fact, which does have some elements of politics to it. But by preference, I'm very keen. I lean towards crime fiction. So today, I'm just here for the recommendations, and I know I'll get some good ones. So looking forward.
Yep. Thanks, Pooja. And yeah, who wants to go next? You see Sanit. Sanit, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. My name is Sanit. This is my third Dialogues with Book session. I'm based out in Kochi. I am an IT professional, and I'm also a comic artist. So I make comics, and I think first time I joined Dialogues with Books was when I saw that there was a discussion on graphic novels. So it was a really good session. Then I got really interested with the passion with which everybody was talking about books. So I joined the last session as well. So that's it. So it's a really, really insightful sessions. So looking forward for the same. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Sanit. Yep. Sanket.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Sanket. I'm in Bangalore. Yeah, I'm interested in literature, since quite some time, and I do read, and I try to write a little bit as well. Although I want to do a lot more of that. I've been attending these sessions fairly regularly, especially so more so since the lockdown. It's made it just easier to log in online and attend these sessions. Looking forward to some engaging conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sanket. So I think we cover everyone except Sandhya, I guess.
Yeah, there's someone called Rashmi also who's trying.
Okay. Yep. Sandhya, you wanna go? Okay, if not, Rashmi, you wanna introduce yourself?
Hi.
Hi, yeah.
Hi, just joined now. There was some technical difficulty here. Yeah, so a little bit on. So all are introducing themselves, is it?
Yeah, that's it. Yes.
Okay, so I stay in BTM basically, and I'm always been so my headphone is not working, so I'm using my headset. It's like office call only. Then so I'm quite interested in reading books, not any particular genre, and I like to read classics specifically. So I just saw this event and I thought like, okay, let me join and see what I can learn from here and explore new genres. So that's all about me.
Yeah, thanks, Rashmi. Okay, I think if everyone is done, I think we can start the session. So, yeah, before that, just a few rules. So let's avoid talking over each other. So you can use the chat option to ask questions, to also speak on a book while someone is talking. So, and the list of books that we'll be discussing will be compiled and will be sent to everyone after the session is over. So you don't have to worry about missing out on the names of the books and the authors that are being discussed. So that said, let's just start. So what's political fiction? So it's literature that comments on socio-political systems, can be set in the past or in the present time, and can also be set in the future and alternate realities. So we'll be, so some known names are 1984 by George Orwell, Lord of Flies, Brave New World and Atlas Shrugged are some works which are which can be called classics in political fiction. So we'll be discussing these as well. And other than that, there are whole different kind of whole variety of other books which are not popularly known. We'll be talking about those too. And by nature, graphic novels are heavily political in its content and approach, but in the interest of time and scope, we won't be discussing graphic novels. So we'll be sticking to normal fiction. So that'll be in scope. And with that, let me just start with a not very well-known book. It's called Chats with the Dead. It's by this Sri Lankan author called Shehan Karunatilaka. This is the second book. So this is a very interesting book because it kind of starts as a crime novel. It starts as a whodunit in which the protagonist tries to investigate the circumstances leading up to his death, which means the protagonist is already dead by the time the novel starts, and it's his ghost that tries to investigate the circumstances of his death. So the protagonist is Malinda Kabalana. He's a homosexual war photographer in Sri Lanka. And he calls himself a gambler, photographer, and a slut. So these are terms that he self-ascribes. And the novel is set in the late 80s during turbulent times in Sri Lanka. So there is war with LTTE, and there is also the Indian peacekeeping force in Sri Lanka trying to maintain peace. And there is also this insurrection by JVP, Neo-Marxist party in the southern Sri Lanka. And the novel pretty much talks about what happens during the war and what happens after the war, all these disappearances of journalists and activists and everything. It's heavily political in that nothing is direct. It uses dark comedy as a vehicle to talk about the race relations, the brutalities of the war, and all the moralities that the subjects try to maintain and profess. The novel actually becomes really metaphorical when you kind of equate the death of the protagonist with that of post-war Sri Lanka itself. Because what Sri Lanka is currently doing is it just emerged from a war. Still, the situation is not so good. And it's more like a dead Sri Lanka trying to go back and investigate the circumstances of what caused its demise in the first place. So it's a really great book. This is the second book by the author. First book is called Chinaman, Legend of Pradeep Matthew. It's about a fictional cricketer. Again, set in Sri Lanka, again, talks about war and other things and cricket too. So that's a specialty of the author. He is political. His writings are political. He doesn't label his work as political, but you cannot escape the snarky take that he takes on the Lankan affairs. So yeah, highly recommended.
There is this other not so well-known book, also not set in Sri Lanka, but set in Malaysia. If you've heard of it, by Rani Manika, called The Rice Mother. Though again, it's not entirely political fiction, but it kind of brings about the atrocities committed by the Japanese army, while they captured Malaysia and things like that. So that just comes and goes in the book. The book as such, I mean, it really you can take it or leave it. It depends on your whether you like this kind of writing per se. But it's just nice to see that perspective in that book, how the war affects everyday life, how that political thing plays out. I was just reminded of it because he was talking about Sri Lanka, then I was thinking of Malaysia, and then that's how it just.
Was it written by an Indian?
No, I think it was written by a Sri Lankan. I think this author is a Sri Lankan who grew up in Malaysia, something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but something to that.
Because the ethnic Indians in Malaysia and those places, generally they have a rosy picture of the Japanese involvement, because most of them ended up supporting Netaji in the INA.
Yeah,
right?
because it is useful to them, right? That story is good. Yeah. No, I don't think she was. She's a Sri Lankan, so that's why I think that she was quite against the Japanese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone wants to go next? Any suggestions? Any books that you read?
There's a novel by Kamila Shamsi called Home Fire, which basically focuses on the journey of British Muslims in Britain and how they have to kind of overcome so much Islamophobia, especially when you're immigrants. So it's a really powerful novel because it also includes a lot of conflict in the Arab Eastern region, and how when your family is linked to that conflict, it's just kind of used as evidence against you when you come from a Muslim background. So it's a really powerful, really interesting novel. And like a lot of us prefaced book suggestions with it's not entirely political in nature, but that's the beauty of politics, right? Because politics is innately human in nature. It's about emotion, it's about experience. And this novel is just so beautiful in the way that it captures that.
Great. Is that an Egyptian author, Kamila Shamsi?
No, she's a British immigrant herself.
Okay. So from where? Which zone?
And she's Arab as well.
Arab. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that reminds me of these novels that talk about migration and immigrants. Something that even Satanic Verses talks about. It's basically a take on what immigrants feel when they move to a new country, especially a country that doesn't either is indifferent to them or doesn't care for them. I know it's a banned book in the country, so I won't talk much. Yeah.
I think I'll go next.
Yeah, sure, Harish.
So the two books that I'll recommend everyone or probably wanna share is by is Exit West and The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid. He's a Pakistani author, lived in West, so he writes about both Western stories as well as in the Middle Eastern, as the whole Arabian world. And one of the recurrent theme across his theme is, so he doesn't directly talk about politics. It's the political scenario keeps on impacting the protagonist. So both of them are love stories, and rather love, and I won't even call them rom-com, but they're more like rom tragedies. So what happens is that the boy meets a girl, they all meet cute story, and then the political uprise changes start impacting their lives. So let's talk about The Reluctant Fundamentalist. It's about the 9/11 time when there is a Pakistani immigrant working there dating a white girl, and the moment it happens, then the Islamophobia breaks his relationship with her, and then he has to come back to Pakistan because of his racism. He gets radicalized and then eventually murdered by CIA. And I think even more interesting than that would be another story is called Exit West. So the story is not mentioned about which countries are the characters from, but you can assume that it's a Middle Eastern war conflict story. It could be from Syria, it could be from Iran, it could be from Kuwait or Iraq, whichever you want to fit in. They only drop cultural narratives there rather than saying. But then the story takes about how both of them try to survive as people without countries and as refugees moving around Europe, US, and how they get displaced by the locals and how the anti-immigration, and so they are not even immigrants, they're like how the anti-refugee sentiment impact their lives and how it essentially conflicts with their version of the kind of love story they wanted and the kind of love story they have to live with. So I think that's something I'll recommend everyone. Exit West.
And the other book that you were talking about, that one was called?
The Reluctant Fundamentalist.
Sorry?
The Reluctant Fundamentalist.
The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Okay.
That's also a movie.
Yeah, it's also a movie.
Okay, can I go? Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, so I've actually got quite a few, like 2-3 books about this. So the first one is this. It's called The Missing Queen. It's actually it actually comes under speculative fiction. It's written by Samhita Arni, and so the premise is that Ram has returned to Ayodhya, and it's been like a few 14 years or so, like 13-14 years or so, and Sita is missing for the past like slightly more or less than a decade, and it's pretty much like modern. It's like a modern retelling of the Ramayana, but there's this journalist who's trying to look for Sita, and it sort of becomes like this very thriller political like book, right? So there's like a lot of espionage that's happening, then you have like this kind of like authoritarian state and whether they need democracy, and yeah, so it's got a lot of political themes in that sense. It has a lot of themes related to like feminism, and it's actually a very fast-paced sort of unputdownable kind of read. I actually got it for my birthday, and it was just really, really thrilling in that sense. And if we're talking about like lived experiences and political fiction through like lived experiences, I've actually been reading quite a lot of young adult literature centering around Black experiences in the US, like especially when the BLM protests were happening and all of that. So there's this author called Angie Thomas. She wrote 2 books. One is called The Hate You Give, which was turned into a very powerful movie as well. It's about like again police shootings and all of that. So the main character's best friend gets shot, and you kind of like, and what it leads to and all of that. And there's another one by the same author. It's called On the Come Up. It's about this young Black girl trying to make it in the rap world, like in the world of rap and hip hop, and the kind of problems that she faces due to her identity as a Black female. So that's like so it's a pretty interesting like take on everything. And both these books are sort of, they reflect the lived experiences of the author herself. So it's set in like the places that we'd call ghetto, so the kind of problems that happen there. So it's like really nice. And what I'm currently reading is this book called The Black Kids. I forgot the name of the author. I can look it up if you like. It's like right there on the desk. But yeah, it's called The Black Kids, and it's essentially about the aftermath of the Rodney King shootings in the US, in like LA, and the kind of problems that it had and how it affected the other people from the Black community as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I have.
I think I missed the name of the first book you mentioned. Could you just repeat it? I'd like to keep an eye out for it.
Yeah, The Missing Queen.
Yeah, who's the author? Who's the author for Missing Queen?
Samhita Adni. Okay. She's an author, I think, who's also based in like Bangalore itself, and right now I think she's doing Bangalore Literature Fest in Atagalata.
Okay.
So I don't know the exact dates when it's happening, but she's like going there. So it's like mythology plus political fiction just sort of like clubbed together in this beautiful spec fic novel. So yeah.
Anyone wants to go next?
All this also reminded me of The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini. So again, one more beautifully written book, and it's all in the nuances basically. So the what happens on the outside is actually very. It's something that you could probably get from the news, but those little details, those relationships that they build, those stand out in your mind. You know how we relate to each other as people. Sometimes is so far away from the politics in that land, right? And how it gets dictated by the media you see, by what people in power tell you and all that. So it's kind of very beautifully written. So I was just reminded of that.
I'll agree to what he just said.
Also, Godfather, right? The Mario Puzo's this thing also, like the Godfather, and particularly the Sicilian, also like really really good like thrillers in that sense. So Godfather is more action based, but thriller is like just way more like political nuances, why this person becomes mafia, like a part of the mafia, how he becomes this, like it's a lot in the internal politics that's like happening. And yeah, and you see Michael Corleone's character in this one, in the Sicilian as well. It's quite a political thriller. Is the way that I read it, I found it to be quite a political thriller kind of novel.
The Sicilian is actually a political thriller because I think it's based on a real person. If I'm not
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah. The story, right? So yeah.
So, but if you'd ask me, the inclusion of Michael Corleone in that novel is, I don't think it was needed. The story
Yeah,
was good by
I
itself.
felt like it was just there to tie it to The Godfather
Right.
rather than just set it in. But like, yeah, I'd actually like to read Omerta because of that, but I haven't been able to find a copy. It's I don't know, it's very difficult to find Mario Puzo's books as such. Godfather I found quite easily. Sicilian I was able to find at a book fair in Hyderabad, and the others I really haven't seen in any of the bookstores that I've been to. So maybe online or something.
No, Omerta used to be a regular at many of the bookstores. I don't know why it's not available now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think I saw at the same bookstore, I think I saw just one thing that was like the complete all the books that Mario Puzo has written, but that's pretty much it. But yeah, like he's also a great political thriller fiction sort of writer as well, even though he does borrow from real life stories. But massive trigger warnings for Mario Puzo. His depictions are very graphic wherever the violence is. So yeah.
I think there was one novel of his which was actually entirely political. It's called The Fourth K. It's one among his. It was not that well received as a novel when it came. It talks about a descendant of the Kennedy family who, in turn, again gets assassinated, and I really don't remember much about the plot. Again, it involves a lot of kidnappings and plane hijacks and Arab terrorists or activists, trying to destabilize Israel. So it's a very convoluted plot, but it's actually good in parts, if you'd ask me.
Shri, the novel you mentioned earlier made me think of this short film, and I'm not really sure if we're allowed to discuss films, but it's this short film called Sita Sings the Blues, and yeah, it's a beautiful modern day retelling of the Ramayana. So you guys should watch it if you have time.
But people in our college who put up a play in my second or third year, I'm not quite sure, but yeah, they put that up as a play as well. So I've seen that. Yeah. Thank you so much, though.
So I was gonna say something. So what I wanted to share about one of my feelings, or I think it's only a feeling that I'm sharing, not some wisdom, but from political fiction, what I feel is that it reminds me of the fragility of our own lives, and we try to feel that there is an abstraction between the politics of our the society we live in and where we live, and it's just a news that we have to deal with. But then things move around, and then it does impact our own lives. So it's not so it on one side it's a sobering of the reality, and on the other side it also kind of nudges me towards being a participant in a democratic process. That it's our lives that are going to impact with this, and either you can be impacted by it or you can be positively contributing to the change. So I think that's one of the things that I like about the political fiction, and I think that's one of the reasons why I got interested into politics at all, because just like any other engineering graduate who only cares about his life and having fun and try to be insulated about anything political and just kind of zones out whenever any political discussion happens. I think books like this got me connected to that.
Yeah, that's true, Harish. Yes.
I really agree with you on that because I'm one such person who zones out when there is like a political discussion. So this meetup should help me to like start exploring this genre as well, Harish.
It's so true because there's this book by Amrita Mahale known as Milk Teeth, which basically follows these two kids in Bombay as they grow up, and the girl has an affair with a Muslim boy, and she's the Hindu privileged girl, so she's usually disconnected from politics. But when she's having that affair with that guy, and the communal riots take place in Bombay, the Sikh Muslim riots, suddenly she finds herself very deeply impacted by what is happening. And it's such a real book because, as somebody who's grown up in Bombay, it uses examples that I have literally grown up around as well. And in a way, like Harish said, it makes me realize that you can't just disconnect yourself from what is happening in your country. And at some point, it's going to affect somebody you love, even if it's not in the same scenario as the book. It will happen one day. And it's a great book, talks about homosexuality in India, talks about the relationship in Islamophobia that we see in the media. So it's really good. I really recommend.
So one thing that I've noticed is, political fiction which is set in the past doesn't impact us that much. These are stuff that we would have heard from people or read as part of history, and then when there is a story weaved set in those times, it still makes it an interesting read, but it doesn't really impact us much. But when we come across fiction that's set in our times, or at least in our living memory, that actually has more impact, and it's even deadlier because the agents from that from history are still around us, still making an impact on our lives. So I think that's what makes it more interesting, and that's what makes it more political too as a work.
Anand, if I can add on to your point, so this is a regional book. Am I allowed to talk about it in this meetup?
We can. Yes.
Okay, so it's Ponniyin Selvan. I'm very fond of that book. So for the love of the language Tamil, I read it. So it's so I wanted to understand what was how to say Rajaraja Cholan's thinking behind that Brihadishwara temple. So that's where this focus will go towards, how he got that idea. So when he went to Sri Lanka, it's a beautifully written novel. So many people would have read it in translations also. But now to think about it, it's actually a political fiction. Like, so there was this competition for the crown. So he chose to step away from it, but still he brought his like cousin there to this position. But what I was trying to look at there was how was like India a little bit before, how was Tamil Nadu, and more about that architecture. So like you said, that impact in a political level, I didn't look at that novel. But now when we discuss here, it's like, yeah, I can still relate to that. So what were the conspiracies going on, and there will be always constant pressure from Pandya dynasty. So they will be coming back to reclaim their position. So like that. So I just thought, suddenly remembered Ponniyin Selvan here.
Is it entirely historically accurate? I don't think so.
It's not.
No, not at all. It's fictionalized completely. Yeah. Even
So I'm not sure if you have read Udayar. Udayar is by
Udayar.
Balakumaran.
Balakumaran. I have heard. I'm yet to read that. Yeah.
That's actually even more political because it talks about the time the big temple was getting constructed.
Okay, okay.
That's even more political because it actually talks about his motive, and took about 12 years to complete the temple, I guess. I'm not wrong.
Yes,
So it talks
yes,
about
yes.
that. So that's also interesting. But again, it's a lot of that is speculative again, because all we know about those times are just some of the stone edicts and some stories which have been passed down over generations.
And also
Still,
it again depends on the author what they want to convey to us. Maybe what is his view might also, I mean, come through the book. So it's never going to be accurate. Yeah, right.
Can I say something?
yeah. Yes, Mohammed.
Yeah, so I just remembered one book. I don't know whether this qualifies as a political. Actually, it's not fiction, but it kind of touches the politics. So it's a book called Once Upon a Time in Soviet Union by Dominic Lapierre, and he has written very few books. He is like one of my favorite authors. So this book is about 1956 Russia. So it's about experience of two French journalists who travel through the Russia, and at that time Russia used to be very strict. So they write their challenges they face there, and it also talks a lot about the Cold War, and you kind of get to know the secret faces of people hidden behind the Cold War, and it kind of tell you how the Soviet regime managed to convince a nation deprived of freedom that it is the happiest on the earth. So these kind of a little politics is there, but it's not totally political. You can read it. It's a nice book.
Hey, can I add something here, Anand?
Yeah.
Sure.
Hey, I missed the better part of the last conversation, so no, I'm not sure. Since we're talking about ancient India and politics, I think one person that comes to my mind is Chanakya, who was all about politics. So there was a book called Chanakya's Chant, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was written by one of these new age Indian authors. I'm not able to recollect the name, but that does.
I think it's Ashwin Sangvi.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so when we talk about politics and fiction, I think a lot of it was fictionalized. He was based during the Magad Empire, right? During Chandragupta Maurya's time, if I'm not mistaken. But a lot of his thinking, everything that, and I think there was alternate. I'm not able to recollect the name, but somebody else has also written a book about him, which goes in parallel. A part of the story is set back in the BCs, and one of them in today's politics and how they relate the two scenarios, and make a point that in politics nothing really has changed since back then. Everything that was happening back then is happening in today, India's politics today. I'm not able to recollect that name. I'll do a bit of digging and come back. If anybody here knows the name of the book that I'm talking about, glad if you can pitch in.
Yeah, but that sounds interesting. I don't know. I haven't come across that, but that
Yeah.
sounds. Yeah.
I get back with the name before the call is done. I have read it. It's somewhere here, but it just suddenly struck me, and I don't remember the name. But that's one of, when we say politics, I think that's one thing that struck me.
Yeah. So since Mohammed mentioned Soviet Union, I think we can circle back to that. And one such work is 1984, which was pretty much about Soviet Union and the perceived evils or ills that Soviet Union can wreak upon the world. So anyone wants to talk about 1984 if you have read it?
I'm just starting with it. Actually, for this meeting, I've completed like 10 pages. It's a very slow read. I was thinking I'll just finish it fast, but I'm just going through it. I just came to the part where Big Brother is introduced and he's writing his diary about it. Yeah, it's
Right.
quite good.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's.
Yeah, Pooja, you were saying something?
No, I thought it's quite a popular book, so I was waiting for someone to add in with their opinions. So I think that one and Brave New World, two of those, deathly. When I read that book, my first notion was, oh my God, this is so terrifying that you're in your own living room and anything and everything that you do is, washed over, reported, and my initial thought was that hey, this can never happen, but now I'm not so sure anymore. as to whether what was written then cannot really happen even in our lifetimes, and not really far away, and maybe in some countries already. So that's a very terrifying thought about the complete massacre of democracy when we talk about politics, right? So that's just my thought, but I'm happy to hear other people.
So Pooja, I think it is already happening. I think this conditions of Uyghurs are as close to 1984 as it could be.
Which is why I couldn't get through the book. I was like, this is too close to reality. Need escapism.
It's a very scary read.
Not for sadness.
So, can we classify the Count of Monte Cristo as political fiction then, if we're talking about the classics?
It is actually. It is. Thing is, it is set in. It is set in history, but I think it doesn't. It's not political in nature actually. It's basically it boils down to vendetta and
personal revenge.
Personal revenge.
Like personal revenge and vendetta, but then there's a lot of like political underpinnings as to why he becomes the Count of Monte Cristo, right? The first few hundred pages of the book, basically the first
right.
100.
But he was more like an unwilling hostage of the political events that were happening around that time.
Yeah.
That
it
doesn't
sort
really
of touches upon, but not really, right? At least that's what I felt when I was.
Sanket, you want to pitch in?
Yeah, I did want to talk about a few books. Since somebody mentioned Brave New World, I'll probably make one or two observations about that. I mean, I guess everybody's sort of aware of Brave New World. It's a dystopian novel by Aldous Huxley. And it's a celebrated novel. I mean, if you look at any list of the 100 greatest novels or whatever, you will typically find it close to the top and so on. I mean, if you look at the book as a sort of a treatise on the forms and functions of how a dystopian world, a consumerist dystopian world might look like. I mean, like some of you mentioned, it's sort of it's already happening and so on. Yeah, in that sense, yes, it works extremely well. It's sort of a compendium of social and economic and industrial concepts. And then basically, it works very well as that again. It is highly entertaining also in some sense, in a almost a perverse sense of the word, right? But as a novel, yeah, I mean, I'm not particularly impressed by it as a work of fiction, as a novel. It works more as a probably more of as a a speculative scholarly work, of I mean, it's quite defining of the political genre of political work, and the social commentary. But how well it works as a novel is questionable in my mind. But it's something that all of us should read, and because it's that's from time to time, the world has seem to have stopped short of entering such an era, right? So we should always be aware of the dangers of what can go wrong with extremely powerful leaders. That a lot of people have this. People generally have this sense, and people generally have this notion that all we need are powerful leaders, and they will set the world right. Whereas that's not really, and history has shown us anything that's never going to work. So in that sense, it's a very good warning, and it's something that should be read in that spirit. Is what I would like to say about the Brave New World.
And it also classifies as a sci-fi, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, you could probably do that. In a sense, yeah. I mean, in terms of the yeah, because it talks about highly technologically advanced world and so on. So in that sense, yes, you could look at it, as sci-fi as well. Yeah.
To add on to what you were saying about powerful leaders, even in the Handmaid's Tale, there is this paragraph I found it very moving, where she says everything begins with something really small. You don't realize that it has kind of entered your life, and then you accept it because you are not directly involved. It's somebody else, somebody that you don't know, who might be under the influence of this particular thing that is so, and then slowly it creeps in, and then after a while you're taken over, and you think it has happened overnight, but it's not true.
Exactly. So
So
there's this related to that. That's a very good point, and then there's related to this. I mean, there's this concept of the parable of the boiling. How do you boil a frog, right? I mean, you don't boil water and put a frog inside it. The frog would jump out. But you put a frog. I mean, how do you catch a frog is a different question. But assuming that you have caught a frog already, that problem is solved, and then you would put it in cold water, and then start heating the water very slowly, right? And most of the world around us feels that way, right? After a while water starts warming up, and then the frog in fact feels nice and groggy and so on, and very soon the water is boiling, and it's scalding hot, and you wouldn't realize it at all. That sort of happens. And I want to sort of briefly return to the couple of themes that sort of emerged a while ago. One is about somebody, I guess it was Sarah, who said politics is inherently human in nature. Yeah, I mean that's and then sort of I want to sort of sort of continue on that thing. I mean, it's and we also, and then somebody, a couple of you also mentioned about how we all sort of there's this tendency to switch off when there is a political discussion and so on. Now I think our very existence is political. So there's I mean the fact that we exist means we are political. There is no two ways about it. And it's there in everything that we do. And politics, regardless of how much we want to stay away from it, we are affected by it, and we affect it. So that's and politics is affected by us as well. So that's going to be there. And the other theme was about whether and not all the works that there are a lot of works, in fact really good works of political fiction, which don't come across as political at all, but they're deeply political. So I want to talk about one such book, which is something that I recently read, and I spoke about it briefly elsewhere. I mean, in another of these sessions. It's a book called The Passport. It's a book by an author called Herta Müller, and she writes in German. She's a Romanian German, and she's, in fact, I think I think she's an exile. She sort of moved out of Romania. So this. I mean, the title of this book in English is very innocuous, The Passport. I mean, although it's the reason it is The Passport is quite central to the book, but the actual German title is quite fascinating. I mean, the literal translation of that would be "Man is a large pheasant in the world," or something of the sort. So that's the actual German, the literal translation of it. I guess the choice of The Passport was is probably driven more by economic principles than literary ones. Regardless, so this is a deeply political novel, except there's hardly any mention of politics at all, right? And this takes place in a German-speaking village in Romania, and this is set under the totalitarian regime of a dictator, a Romanian dictator called Nicolae, Ceausescu. So this is basically we hear and we have heard a lot of persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany and so on and so forth. This is basically this is basically about the persecution of Germans in Romania. So Germans in Romania are a minority in certain regions, and this is essentially about the ethnic cleansing of them, and so basically everybody is leaving those places, and that's where the whole point of passport comes in, right? So essentially this whole it's a very small novel, and it's written in beautiful rhythmic language, like very like short sentences, very highly descriptive. It's beautifully written. I mean, you could just read that in a few hours, but then it makes a deep impression on you. So the plot is quite straightforward. In fact, there's not much of a by means of a story there. It's just I mean, it's so deceptively simple, but then it's it's all these different meanderings that the author takes within that story, within the broad confines of that story is what makes it very interesting. So it's basically the plot is that it's basically about, there's this guy, Miller, who is who runs a mill basically, and he and his family are waiting for their passports to leave, to leave the place and move to the west basically. So that's basically what it is. And then in order to get a passport, they need to sort of go through all sort of things, because it's an extremely corrupt society there, and so basically it's like he has paid money, he's been giving sacks of flour and so on, but then what is really needed is essentially that the local the police chief and the bishop of the church, etc., have to meet his daughter basically. That's the final thing, right? So basically the daughter has to go there and sleep with them, and that's essentially when they're going to get the passport, and that's basically happens, and it's told in a very nonchalant way, that because that's just the reality there. So while like I said, there's very little talk of politics. In fact the name of Nicolae Ceausescu just comes up only once, but it's very clear that on the one hand there is this whole disillusionment of communism and the reforms, and the power to the people, that the promise that the East. So this Romania is essentially sort of torn between the East and West, right? This is, on the one hand you have all this the socialism and the communism and power to the people, and then there is on the other hand the promise of grandeur that the West has, right? So people are torn between that. So in that sense, I think it's and it gives you a very deep insight into the sort of things that that were happening in a place like Romania, about which we don't really hear much at all. So I would definitely recommend that book.
Great, Sangeet. I think you mentioned it in one of the previous sessions. I guess I remember the name of the book. And it kind of reminds me of The Tin Drum by Günter Grass, because again it talks about an ethnic German in a different land. But again, it's not entirely political fiction. Yeah, it does talk about politics in a very indirect way. Doesn't name names or anything. So this book is set in kind of starts in the 20s and goes on till 50s, I guess. So it's pretty much a semi-biography of sorts by the author. The author grew up in the free city of Danzig, which is now in Poland, which was once a free city, as in like it was populated by Germans and Poles alike. And finally it went to Poland after end of World War II. So it's also a work of magic realism. So it's a mix of different types of genres. So it's really hard to label it as political fiction, but it does talk about politics from a very funny point of view.
But also, like, coming to the point that you made about like the personal being political, right? Like all our lives are inherently like political in one way or another. There's actually a lot of like young adult fiction that's coming out both in India and like, in Western literature as well. There's a lot of like geared towards like young adult type, or like, having these kind of protagonists also coming up that deal with the political in the personal. Like for example, there's this book, it's called Dress Coded. It's like this middle school type thing, and it features a young black woman, like girl, as a protagonist, and they're all in like 8th grade, and they're protesting against the systemically oppressive dress codes in American schools, right? Like you can't wear sleeveless clothes, you can't wear this, you can't wear that. Then there was another really nice one that I read recently. It's called Felix Ever After, and it's the protagonist is a trans kid, right? Who's in school. So how his personal life is sort of molded by his identity, for that matter, because this is a black trans kid, right? So yeah, so there are those kind of things as well. Like there's a lot of young adult literature in India as well. There's another book called Other Words for Home, wherein a person is traveling from I forgot which Middle Eastern country it was, but one of the Middle Eastern countries to, because I just started reading it and then I had to put it aside because other work happened. And she's traveling to America, and then she's trying to figure out the concept of home and how even like, sort of adjusting to two different cultures, to two different societies, as an immigrant, as a Muslim woman, as a woman of color, and as a woman also, right? So the kind of intersectionality of identities and the very, very inherently political nature. So while they might not have overtly political themes, they actually deal with how the larger political structures, the larger systemic structures basically affect your day to day as well. And that's a pretty interesting like sort of direction that young adult literature seems to be going in right now, because earlier it used to be like your John Greens and David Levithans and all of that, and it's like really, it's mushy, it's cute, like love stories type things, and like a little bit more, maybe they'll touch upon like one or two social political issues and all of that. But right now it's like the way young adult is going, it's just centered around these experiences, very, very diverse experiences, and it's pretty interesting to see the genre itself like take off in that sense. Yeah.
As well as like fictional realms, like earlier it used to be Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is more or less just a white novel, a white kid's novel that has magic in it. But we see authors like Rick Riordan really go out of their way to kind of make spaces that feature non-binary children, people who don't fall onto the straight and homosexual ends of the spectrum, and black people of colors, things like that. And it's just really amazing to see the way that literature is evolving, especially in context to our generation.
Yeah.
So that was I really loved what you said.
Right, and the kind of stories that we're leaving behind for other generations, and it's sort of like just telling them that, hey, you know what, whatever your identity is, you're valid, you're there, and we have something that you can relate to, which was just great. And also like political fiction or fiction that has like these kind of themes, actually, like it's so powerful, right? Like it can like sort of spur movements as such. Like I think Sanket was talking about Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, right? So there's another so Huxley writes about these things like quite often, and one of the one of the novels, the title of the novels actually inspired the band The Doors, and the title itself is The Doors, right? And so the name of the band per se, and plus his work has inspired them to make music that is so politically charged, especially in the wake of the Vietnam War in the 70s and during the hipster movement and all of that. So very anti-establishment type music as well, so which is also like really, really interesting in that sense.
Like a little bit on a tangent from what we're discussing, but Manto is a very, very powerful political writer, especially in context to partition literature. Um, he does a lot of short stories instead of full blown novels, but even they are so impactful. Not for those who are weak of heart, because he has really graphic descriptions of some of the things he himself witnessed during the partition, sexual trafficking, communal riots, things like that. But the way he describes it, it is amazing. And
Absolutely.
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, just Anant was saying earlier how sometimes it's easy to disassociate yourself when political fiction focuses on an incident in history. And that was the case in context to Manto for me personally. But the more I read, the more I reread the things he has written, the more I realize that these are still issues that are prevalent today. They just get amplified in context to things like war or partition. And it's important to know the extremes so we can work on today so it doesn't get that bad.
If you like Manto, read other works by the people in the PWA, the Progressive Writers Association, and all of that. So like Isma Chugtai, again very similar to Manto. Love her so much. Also like Rashid Jahan as well. Like I've read a few of her stuff because again it's not very available like Manto and Chugtai are, but also like brilliant work. So yeah, like if nothing else, there's this Isma Chugtai. I think she wrote just one novel, if I'm not wrong, which was the Crooked Line, Teri Lakir, and it's brilliant. Like when you talk about the personal being political, it's brilliant in that sense. Like so, it touches upon sexuality, religion, modernity, and femininity, like education, everything, and it's just like and it's semi autobiographical. Like the protagonist's life is molded like the way that the protagonist's life unfolds, it is like her own life as such, and it's beautiful though. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just want to sort of echo what Sarah said about Mantu. Yeah, there's this book of short stories called Mortal Dawn. I think 50 odd stories around partition. I mean, of course, there's a historical context and everything is set around the partition, but they're also highly personal as well as political, and definitely a very powerful short stories. In fact, I mean, at least in my experiences, there's a lot of work of and very good work of political fiction that has come out of Indian languages, regional languages, and Anant Murthy's Avasthe, for example, the Kannada novel. I mean, I'm sure there's a translation talks about the rise of socialist politics in Karnataka, and all the glory, the glorious parts of it, as well as the tragic end of it, and that Yayati by Khandekar, as well as there are a bunch of books, of course, that have come out in every language. I'm sure. So there's a great deal, or there's a great tradition of, in fact, political fiction that's. I think in India we do like politics a lot, and we unlike in many other countries, we do talk about politics fairly openly. Although a lot of the discourse is extremely jarring and yeah, like very sort of polarized and tribalistic and so on. But then the very fact that we talk a lot about politics, even in public sphere, is sort of a testimony to that. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, again. So that's something I wanted to touch upon. Political fiction in India, be it regional or English Indian writing. I've noticed that the regional literature has more space for political fiction than Indian English writing, because with Indian English writing you have a lot of people to please, I believe, and with regional literature, I think it's very natural to write stuff that's political in nature. You want to talk about some of the works in Kannada or any other language?
No, I'll come back.
Hi everyone.
People let the others.
Yeah. Yeah, Sanid, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a regional book with me right here. It's called, it's a Malayalam book. There was an English translation as well called, it's the Malayalam title is Pradi Puvan Kori, and the English title is The Cock is the Culprit. So, and also I think Havish was also mentioning about allegories, which the current authors are using to discuss politics because they don't want to get into trouble, or, you know, that's a very creative way to push political ideas as well. So in this particular book, it's about a rooster who is crowing at unusual times. Instead of in the morning, it is crowing while the puja is happening in the temple, while the azan is happening at the mosque, while the national anthem is playing at any event. It is crowing at unusual times, and the people starts to, you know, to see this particular, and the rooster is always invisible. So the people of that particular village, it happens in a village. So the people of that particular village sees the rooster as a threat to national security and wants to kill it. So that's the basic thin plot line of the book. And it's all this, you know, there is one particular guy who is a bit progressive. So he thinks this is ridiculous. He's like the straight guy. And the entire village is hellbound on killing the rooster and starts killing all the roosters in the village as well. So it's a very, you know, there are multiple ways which you can interpret the book. It's a direct satire as well, but at the same time, you can see the rooster as a, you know, as an invisible dissenter, or as something which is not, and something, an invisible enemy which is being invented by the villagers as well. So it works at multiple level, but it's all through and through. There is that tinge of humor throughout, and it's a really fun. It's a very short read as well. It's a very small book, and there was an English translation as well called "The Cock is the Culprit." It's written by Unni R, who is a well-known screenwriter in Malayalam film industry as well. So yeah, I was, because you said the regional language, I think you're right in that aspect as well. I don't know if anybody knows, there was a writer called O.V. Vijayan. He was a cartoonist as well, but he's also a very prolific writer in Malayalam. I think his works are translated in English as well. He also used to write in English. There was a book called Dharma Puranam, which is again it's about a king. I think it was written during emergency period, so very relevant to these times as well. It has a very blunt, crude language, but it works. It's about a king and how the king's waste, you know, his waste is treated as prasad by the entire country. That kind of a devotion that the country exhibits towards the king, and you know, how the foreign people who know that it's not this particular divine thing, but they play along so that they don't ruin the foreign relations with the particular king. So it's a very, it was written 30 years back, but I think it's relevant in a very global context today as well. Yeah. So just wanted to recommend that. Yeah. Thanks.
While Sarah was talking about some books set in Mumbai, right? So there another author who wrote about politics in Mumbai, as in it was woven into his stories, is Rohinton Mistry, is what I can think, where he talks about how scenarios affect everyday life of people living in Bombay at that time and how they get affected. And one thing that I like is he shows how we are all human. You know, there are scenes where, you know, the Parsis are calling the Maharashtrians, you know, they're calling them Ghatis, and then the Maharashtrians are calling the Parsis Babajis. So everything, it's all like how nobody is beyond reproach, right? We're all in that same pool, right? So that kind of thing. So it's quite nice to see how, you know, it plays out in everyday life. So that's what I wanted to mention.
Actually, something that Sanit, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Something that you said about the cock is the culprit reminded me of this novel we actually had in our syllabus. It was called Halabaloo and the Guava, okay? Back in the 12th grade when I was giving the paper. And it's by Kiran Desai. And it's basically based in a small village in India with a young man named Sampath who doesn't want to live and be contained by the life that is expected of him. So he has this kind of mental breakdown at a village wedding. Post the breakdown, he goes and he decides to just sit in a guava tree in an orchid far, far away. And he does this for no other reason other than the fact that one, he's very lazy, and two, he really just enjoys being away from people. But when his family comes, they beg and they plead, and eventually they realize that, oh, we can make some quick money off it. And they commercialize him as a sadhu. So he becomes the village sadhu, and people from all over India come around to worship him and get his blessings. And this guy actually just does not care because that's not what he's about. And it's an amazing take on Indian culture and how there's this need for divinity or the need to worship something. And it's this microscopic take because you look at his family specifically, the relationships in his family, how those affect the commercialization of what he chooses to do. So, just because you mentioned the humorous take that the Malayalam adaptation has, I thought this was also a novel that kind of goes in the same flow.
Yeah, since we are talking about the regional language literature, so a couple of books that I want to briefly talk about. One I just mentioned, Avasthe, uh, by Anantmurthy. See, I mean, one thing that I want to sort of Anant made this point that regional language literature seems to have given more space, for politics and political theme and so on, which is true. I think what we also sort of have, I think this is something that we have sort of briefly discussed before as well. There's a lot of good work that comes in Indian regional languages that is not accessible to a lot of people because they're not good enough translations and so on. I mean, in fact, I mean, this could be controversial, but I wager, I at least I've always believed that the best works in India, don't come in English. I mean, not Indian writing in English, but in other languages. I have read some really good works. I mean, in Kannada, obviously, because that's my language, but also from Malayalam, Hindi, and Bangla, etc. in translation. And then they're really of high quality. So anywhere you find a good translation, please pick it up. So that's my side biased opinion and side point. But anyway, so coming back to Avasthe, as I was saying, it's actually sort of semi-fictionalized version of that sort of chronicles the life of a politician, a social sort of reformer leader turned politician called Shantaveri Gopalagowda, from Karnataka. Basically, Avastha means a stage of life and so on. So Avastha is a stage basically, and basically he sort of talks about different stages in the life of a quintessential story of how somebody like him who comes from a very, very poor background and starts getting into a lot of starts doing a lot of work for the society, and then comes up and so on. But eventually it's some so it's a cliche that power corrupts and so on, but then that you do see you do see that happen almost always, right? So it's in that sense it talks about how this great hope of socialism, right, and eventually starts turning into more of an illusion, and how the leaders associated with that still sort of live in their own glorious delusions, but then there's not much real outcome. So that's a very one of I mean, if you look at it, almost everything that Anant Murthy has written, all the novels are political in one way or the other. And he's written another later on a novel called Bhava, and then Divya, and so on. All of those have great influence of his thinking, which was completely a lot of leftist thinking and so on. But this is something that's it is a very quintessential political novel, because it is about somebody who becomes a politician, and so on and so forth. Another book, I mean, there are many books, but then another one that I sort of that came to that I could recall at the moment is by an author called Chandrasekhar Kambara. Kambara again is somebody who is written everything almost. I mean, he takes a lot from folklore and myth and so on, but almost everything he has written is again very political, right? And one particular book is one particular novel that I sort of recall is a novel called Shikhara Surya, which is essentially written as a folk tale set in a very old sort of a tribal kingdom. Except when you read it, it's very evident what he's writing about. It's almost like it's essentially everything that is happening in the modern times, but taken back a couple of centuries, taken a couple of centuries back, and then sort of so it's just some of those, the settings are different. It's a king and a palace and a tribal wars and so on, but then you could easily sort of replace them with what is happening in the modern world. And it's almost exactly the same. There's still the intrigue. There is all sort of palace intrigues. There are there are conspiracies. There are opponents. There are rulings that favor that favor the king and his henchmen, which are sort of sold as something as very popular and so on. So all of that is exactly what you would imagine in a modern political setting, and except it's written, it's set in a different sort of a world. Right? Yeah. So those are a couple of books I wanted to talk about, from the regional languages. But you can find a lot more examples in every Indian language, and those are a lot of them are really well written.
Sankey, do we have translations available for Kambara's works?
I'm sure at least some of them are available, because he won the Jnanapith Award, so I'm sure that would have led to some them. I'm sure Ananthamurthy's works are translated, at least his popular novels. The Sanskara Avastha and Bharatipura are definitely translated. I don't know about the others, but even Kambar's work should be translated.
Yeah, to add on to Indian political fiction, I also wanted to talk about Tagore's Gora. So it's amazing that it was written so many years ago, but it still brings out all the elements of politics that exist in the world today, and also how individually we relate to that what do you call the theory or whatever we subscribe to in our personal life, how it undergoes change. It's not something that is static. We grow up with something that's given to us by our parents, and then we move. So it's actually beautifully written in that sense, in that evolution that happens, of how he learns to accept his own flaws and say that there are limitations to the way I'm thinking, and how we are not really it's not that there is evil in us. It's because we are misguided. We have been brought on these it's just very nice, the way it goes, very sensitively written. And another thing that I really liked about it is the women in the story are really people who do things. I'm not saying they're necessarily powerful people, not this Kali type of thing. That's also a little bit done to death. But this is more of having agency over their own decisions, and being, which is very surprising for the era in which the book was written, because even today it is such a struggle to to even make simple decisions. So this is Gora by Tagore. So it's a wonderful read. It's really nice. If if you are one of the people who don't like politics, you should read this book, because it gives you politics in this nice gentle way of Tagore, like he usually does. Nothing that will I'm not saying that it's not effective. It is very effective, but it will probably come to you in a way that you like to read it in. So
okay, let me give you an example of a book which doesn't like serve politics that way. So this book is called This Could Have Been the Tale of Ramayan Chamar, and it's a Bengali book with this author called Subimal Mishra. And this is the most unconventional book that I've ever read, because this is called an anti-novel. It's not a novel. It's an anti-novel, so which means this book will not have a start, will not have a finish. It doesn't have a plot to make things more complicated. It's more of a political commentary written in a very, I don't know how to name it, more of a postmodernist, way, because it just talks about the author's attempts to write a novel about this person called Ramayan Chamar, who was who is this tea estate worker turned Naxalite, and he ends up dead in a police custody. So the story is mainly about him, or the attempts of the author to write a story about this Ramayan Chamar. And a lot of things come in the way when he tries to write this book. These would be personal troubles, family issues at home with the family, or even political struggles. So the narrative just keeps meandering from one thing to the other. So you'll never know what is being what's the subject that that you're reading upon at a given moment. All of a sudden you'll be like there'll be the narration about the book, and then the author himself will appear in the novel, and it kind of takes a meta route, and from then on there'll be some kind of a social commentary about the society around him, or the politics around him. So it's pretty much a commentary, and that's what makes it a very difficult read, because it follows no set pattern, and it's called anti-novel. That's how the author himself describes that, which makes it more difficult to read. But it's a really good book. I think it was written in the 70s, I guess, towards the end of Naxalite movement and the beginning of the communist rule in West Bengal, and nobody is spared in this book. And I think that's all I can explain about the novel. It's more of an experience. And there is an English translation available, of course.
Yeah, I would really, if anybody else has any more like Bengal-centric literature, because I really want to learn more about the communist movement that happened in Bengal.
Anybody? Because this is the only Bengali work of fiction that I've read.
Yeah, I've read a few, but I can't recall anything specific around the communist movement right now. If I recall something, I'll definitely post on the chat.
Yeah, you can put it up on the group also if it happens after the meeting. But thank you.
And Sirisha, you want to jump in and talk about anything that you're reading or have read?
Yeah, I was just listening to you guys. So before the session, I was just thinking I had two books on my mind, both on the political discourse in Kashmir and the kind of different approaches both the books take. One is a fairly simple book, which is The Far Field, and I think most of you guys have heard of it or maybe read it. Beautiful book. It's a story of this girl who's from Bangalore who goes in search of her mother's friend, long lost friend. She goes in search to Kashmir, and she stays with a couple of Muslim local native families there, and she kind of learns about the ongoing dispute there, learns about both the sides of it, at least very briefly, and she has time to kind of contemplate and see what really is happening. But this political note that's happening is kept very subtle. Neither does she give any sort of a biased account, or nor does she take sides very, at least not openly. So that is one book, and one more is Ministry of Utmost Happiness. I personally did not really enjoy that book because, to be honest, I couldn't keep up with it after some point of time. So there is this one line somewhere in the book where she says, to understand what is happening completely, you have to become everyone. No, you have to become everything. So I kind of feel like that is what she did in the book, where she kind of gets in the shoes of like almost every character in the book, or like every situation. And the kind of narration style that she's used is very complicated. But anyway, so she talks about the separatism, the Kashmir nationalism, what is happening, and all of that. But it is, as an activist, obviously the kind of take that she has on the political ongoing scenario in Kashmir is very different from other books that we've read. It is obviously not unbiased, or maybe it's not possible to be unbiased when you're in that level of this thing. But yeah, those are two books which I thought are good to compare when you're talking about one sort of political thing that is for about Indian politics. Apart from that, I just wanted to talk about Half of a Yellow Sun, to understand what happened in Nigeria in 1960s, a little before the war and a little after the war. And like Vaidehi was talking about that time, about like it kind of helps us understand how war affects our day-to-day life, about our individual situations, and how it really impacts our thinking, and how it kind of also drastically changes the way we look at certain people or certain movements. So I think it for people who have not really explored African political discourse, I think it's a really great book to start off. Maps is also another wonderful book, but yeah, I just want to talk about maybe these books. One thing I was when I started thinking of political fiction, I kind of thought that's not a genre that I've explored a lot. But then when I thought of books that I've read, almost all books have an undertone. So whether it was Kiran Desai's Inheritance of Loss, or whether it is Khaled Hosseini, we already discussed Kite Runner, but even the other books written by Khaled Hosseini, or so many of even Indian writers, whether it is Arundhati Roy, or most of these books have political undertones. So it is not something that is inseparable. You can't really just write something about our social life or something very deep and personal to you without kind of taking into account what is happening around you socially and politically. So like we've already established in this context that it is something very inherently human. That is also true. And like Sanket said, you are political. If you're existing, that means you are political. You are actively, indirectly, directly, or taking part in the political movement that's going on around you. So I think, and that is reflected in almost all the works, which is why I believe writers can't really just separate that from their work. So yeah, after thinking that, I've kind of figured that almost every book that I've read has some sort of political undertone in it. That's all I think.
Thanks, Aisha.
Like since since I mentioned Half of a Yellow Sun, I think so. One larger point I want to sort of make here is, at least for me personally, while I do read history a bit, I don't really sort of read history just for the sake of it, in the sense that, or I'm not really big on reading books which talk about history of a place and so on. And at the and then I don't read non-fiction which is basically political in nature. But then I try and absorb as much history and politics from reading novels, or learning about the history of a place, or the politics of a place in the context of the human story, there, right? I mean, otherwise, I mean, just reading a politics, just reading history, if I find it generally a bit dry. So I had no idea, for example, of this whole struggle in Nigeria, about the Nigerian and the Biafran war, right? And then the whole and through that, what I really learned is, and it's sort of almost outrageous how Africa was sort of divided by the all the different European colonialists, right? So basically, Africa was basically the fate of Africa was decided from some meeting rooms in Europe, without any of these guys have actually even visited the place, which caused a great deal of problems in Africa through all of these civil wars and so on. I mean, if you really look at Nigeria, I mean, although now there might be generally peace and so on, but so there are very, very different kinds of people, and you basically call that whole thing as one country because it is sort of convenient. It's like slicing, if you take Africa as a cake, and these guys were nicely slicing it to sort of form very regular shapes, and the ones that sort of you get to more or less find it as a fair division among themselves, whereas the reality there was very, very different, which is what led to the Nigeria Biafra war, in the 60s there. And half of Yellow Sun does a pretty good job of talking about bringing this to the general awareness of people. Although as a novel, it is again problematic in terms of character development and so on. But in terms of insight about Africa, and in terms of specifically about Nigeria and the politics there, it's a pretty good book.
And
did we discuss The Handmaid's Tale? Did someone talk about it?
You only brought it up, Vaidehi.
Yes.
I brought it up, but I'm halfway through. So I thought I'd finish it before the meet today, but I couldn't. So it was a little too dark, so I have to take breaks, and so somebody else wants to talk about it.
Anybody wants to talk about it? Yeah, Sarah. Yeah.
Sorry. Actually, when you brought it up, this was also something I wanted to say, is that when you look at The Handmaid's Tale, right, you realize how much of a woman's life is literally just political in nature. You have to fight for the right to survive, and it is portrayed so well in that book. And I do know that it's taken to extremes, like concepts like slut shaming, concepts like chastity, things like that. But when you look at it in context to that novel, you understand the extremes that women have to live in sometimes, because if you don't, then you can in our current scenario, it can be things like rape, domestic violence, etc., and in that dystopian scenario, it can literally lead to your death. So it was an amazing read, but you do have to take breaks, so I get where you're coming from.
But I'm right at the point where I don't want it to be a spoiler, but then it's like basic acts of hygiene are also being monitored. It's kind of very creepy, and but then at the same time, I think you do. The funny thing is, you do identify with the character. That's what actually puts me off more than anything else. Not the fact that it is extreme, but the fact that at some level, oh yeah, this is how it's going to be. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but at some level, you are right there with the character, which might be a little problematic, but it's scary. So,
yeah, because the book it plays off the female instinct of life. I don't know how else to describe it, but when you're a female, there are things that you know innately, like, oh, I cannot travel out in the dark on my own, and not because I'm not like independent or self-aware, just because I know it's unsafe for me, and things like that. When you read it in context to the book, it really messes with your own moral understanding of those things that you do in your life. So it's a book that really shakes you up on the inside, and such powerful socio-political commentary. I've rarely seen it ever in any novel.
yeah, it's really good, but I need like my own time to finish it, so it just needs, if I'm not constantly being thrown into some sort of, it's quite a difficult read, I would say.
There's another book by Manjula Padmanabhan.
I think we lost Shri. Shri, are you there?
world of the book, there is only one woman ever.
Shri, I
Right?
think we need to start over
Yeah.
again. We lost you there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. No, my internet connection's like really terrible. But there's this book called Escape by Manjula Padmanabhan, which is sort of similar to Handmaid's Tale, but in this world there are no women at all, and one woman has been raised by like in secrecy. So in order to like the moment she starts growing up, she has to be transported from that place into another place wherein women are alive, right? And so it's about that journey and how they're like hiding from people. So again, it also touches upon how a woman's very existence is political in that sense, especially the moment you start growing up, and that means you're no longer safe and you have to be sent to another safe place. So it touches upon those themes. Again, it's a bit of a heavy book, so I'm like sort of halfway done with it. So yeah, but it's a pretty interesting dystopian fiction from India, and I think the sequel or another book set in the same universe is also coming out soon. So yeah.
Okay, and I have a book to talk about. This has kind of handmaid's tale feel to it, but it's actually based on a real incident. This one is called The Abbess of Crewe. CREWE. That's the name of a nunnery or convent. It's by this writer called Muriel Spark. She was a Scottish writer in English. And it talks about, so the book is about the abbess of a convent getting accused of surveillance by a fellow sister, who in turn has been in the news for having entered into a sexual relationship with a Jesuit priest. So the main characters are all female in this book, and it happens inside a convent, and it talks about the political struggle that two sections have, headed by two different nuns. One is a nun. She eventually becomes the abbess. Her name is Alexandra, and she comes from a noble family. And on the other hand, we have someone called Felicity, who comes from a normal family, who becomes a nun, but in turn is gets into free love and starts propagating that among other sisters. And the abbess, in turn, she sets up sort of a video and audio surveillance all over the abbey, and starts kind of spying upon the nuns, and just to see where they stand and how to bring them in control. The book is actually based on the Watergate scandal, of Richard, which led to the resignation of Richard Nixon, and it pretty much follows the events that happened in the Watergate scandal to the dot. Just that those events have been transferred into an abbey instead of White House or a political presidential setting. And there is also this mild dark comedy that runs along the narration, because if you look at it, the whole scheme of the abbess has been really ridiculous from the start, which is pretty much the same case with the Watergate scandal also, which also involves videotapes and surveillance. And Pooja, I want to talk about Parva. I think it's still classifies as political fiction in parts.
Oh, it is quite a read. It was not what I went into it. My expectations were slightly different, and what I got is just way more in the face reality of how things actually were. But in terms of politics, yes, it does have that underlying political angle to it throughout, with respect to how alliances, or even back in the day, how alliances had to be formed, how spy networks run, how just in terms of the strength of your cavalry, your strength of your infantry, your strength of your armed forces, in terms of how nothing really has changed. We're talking about different kinds of weapons today. but ultimately a resolution of every kind of conflict seems to be that. So that was an interesting line. But there were a lot of the difference that I see, that there at least were attempts to abide by a certain rule, a certain principle back then, saying, hey, this is how governance should be. This is how they respected the norms set by the principles. But today, I think everything is truly, truly fair in love and war, as they say. So that those are the true parallels that I can draw. But Anant, I think you've read that too, right, before me. So what are your thoughts on that? Like to know that.
What I really liked was the feminist take on the characters in the novel. So yeah, for those who don't know, Parva is more like a realistic take on Mahabharata, or and it talks about the characters in a totally non-divine way. Like the characters are human, there are no divine elements at play. So everyone has had a normal, human birth instead of having divine births. And Krishna is also a normal human being, just that he is more cunning and wily. He doesn't have any superpowers. And the whole war, and it's also quite non-linear in narration. And the best part about the book is the author just lets the characters do all the talking. And there is this whole, so each character just delves on the past. They think about how the events transpire and how why they find themselves in the way they are. And it does talk about I think it's one of the few tellings of Mahabharata where you get to feel or hear the thoughts of Draupadi, what she went through, or even Kunti, or even a lesser known character like Madri, who is the second wife of Pandu. But that way, I mean, this book has a lot of room for the lesser known characters, especially the female characters in Mahabharata. And what really, and it talks about war, not just, the Mahabharata war, it just talks about war, how destructive it can get, how real it can get. And the part that really shook me was the aftermath of the war. And that's something that you get to see see anywhere, be it the World War II, or be it the partition of India. The end of a war, be it a civil war or a war between nations, it's pretty much the same. It's just destruction and people trying to get back to their normal lives, the struggle to get back to the normal lives. And I think, but towards the end of the novel, it gets really heavy that way.
Yeah, and more recently, Bhairappa has written this novel called, Bhairappa is author of Parva, right? So, called Uttarakhand. Basically, this is a retelling of Parva is what Mahabharata is a retelling of Ramayana, and here again, similar. You will see similar motifs. This is from the point of view of Sita and so on. And I mean, although it's not really a political novel in that sense, I wouldn't really talk about it. But it's more. But those of you who have read Parva, I guess you might be interested in Uttarakhand as well, which is a more recent novel by Bhairappa. Yes, this is Vasudevan Nayar's. So one or two books I wanted to talk. One is, of course, this is. I guess we'll have to talk about this. This is sort of comes up in every list of political fiction, which is William Golding's Lord of the Flies. Right, and so I have a very interesting relationship with this book. So I'm part of a startup. I been part of a funding team of a startup, and I always like to tell a lot of people, and especially people who come in to work into a startup, that look, a startup is like a bunch of boys left on an island. It could go the Coral Island way, where everybody cooperates and then works together, and the situations are similar. I mean, the environment is similar. The initial conditions are similar. There's a lot of uncertainty and crunch for resources and so on and so forth. But you could all come together and build something great, or it could just go down, and you might fight each other and so on. And a lot of startups. Take the Lord of the Flies route. So for if you haven't read Lord of the Flies, I mean, you should obviously. I mean, even if you don't read Coral Island, it's still okay. Because Lord of the Flies, I say, is a lot more impressive and a lot more powerful in that sense. So essentially, it's about the situation is similar. The starting situation in which there's a shipwreck, and then a bunch of boys are they find themselves on an uninhabited island, and now they need to figure out what to do. Right now, of course, once the initial period of shock and all of that is over, now they need to figure out, like, how do we survive, what do we eat, and then once they figure out some of that, then the next question of we need to bring some sort of a social order here, right? And that's basically that's where things start sort of going south, and there are a lot of struggles, a lot of fights between people, and then certain some leaderships emerge, but then there's also there's also a lot of politics that comes up. So it's a very it's a society and politics in a microcosm, right? Very, very localized, like completely cut out from from the rest of the world. And so it's also sort of a thought experiment in a sense, that what would happen if something, if you were in such a situation, what would happen? And William Golding, of course, has a very pessimistic take on it. But I mean, you would even, but given the way things work, and generally, you would probably think that's more realistic than the Coral Island, version of it, where things are hunky dory, and everybody gets along very well, and eventually they sort of so at the end of a lot of the Flies, of course, there's finally somebody comes to rescue these boys, and then so that adult intervention is required at the end of it, right, and then to set things right. So it's a very nice, I mean, it's again, like it's there is it is it can there is some sort of violence, there is so you wouldn't think that it's not a children's book, basically, right? I mean, also it's all they're all children, but yeah, I mean, I think that's something that that's a classic that I guess everybody should give a look.
Thanks. Okay, that's on my list. That has been on my list for, I don't know, almost 2 decades now. I should I should start reading it.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Anand, but is it possible for us to just get a group picture once and then continue on with the discussion?
Yeah, sure. Others want to turn on their cameras?
If anybody else wants to turn on your cameras, and just give 1 more minute, and then I'll just give a countdown, kind of thing.
Yep.
All right. Can we just 3, 2, 1, smile? All right. Thank you so much.
and I have a book to talk about. Again, it's a different kind of a political fiction. This one is called The Monkey Wrench Gang. The author's name is Edward Abbey. So it is kind of considered prime anarchist book, or a fine specimen of anarchist literature. So this is about 4 self-declared eco warriors, nature lovers, who join hands to destroy what they see as unwanted development projects happening in America. So this is set in, I think, in early 70s, I guess, early to mid 70s. And these 4 people, they start destroying corporate projects, be it train lines or mining operations or construction projects, and it's a very unlikely gang of members. All 4 are from different parts of the society. One is a hobo, which are having a very violent past. The other one is a Mormon, sort of a lapsed Mormon, who has 3 wives, and he's also sort of a guide. He also joins the operation. And the other one is a Armenian American doctor, who actually is a rich doctor who earns a lot of money, but still sees development as something that must be kept to a minimum. It's sort of has a very Luddite worldview. And the 4th person is his mistress. She's a Jewish woman from Bronx. Again, all geographically separate people having a singular view on how to save ecology, and they end up just destroying a lot of development projects, and there are people who are on their trail trying to arrest them. So the whole book is about these people getting into this destruction mode, and people and authorities and other people trying to catch hold of them. It's a really nice book because it, depending on the age and your political position that you find yourselves in, you will actually take a stance. Sometimes you sympathize with the character. Either you will sympathize with the characters or you will sympathize against them. Because if you look at it, the whole thing sounds kind of ridiculous, because the characters themselves know that they cannot win this war against corporate America, but they still end up doing that because someone has to do the job. So that's kind of their rationale. And there's one more way to look at this book. This is also seen as a new Western, because this pretty much happens in the Southwest, kind of happens across Utah, Colorado, parts of Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. It's also seen as a new Western, where your hero is not a cowboy, but these people who are out to save nature. And the opponents are not your Native American tribes, but it's corporate America itself. Just that in the end, the cowboys don't win. It is the corporate America that wins. And it also, you'd also like it if you're a nature lover, because the author talks at length about nature, the national forests in America. So it's pretty much set in those locales. It's quite interesting. It's a different kind of book, and that the book was also a reason for I think it was a reason for a very short-term boost in eco movement in the US. Also, you had a lot of other people getting inspired by the book, and even one of the characters from this book, one of the authors who wrote about ecology also took after the name of one of the characters from this book. And we are almost at the end of our discussion. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, I'll probably talk briefly about one more book and then stop. So this is a book called Snow by Orhan Pamuk. Turkish book. It's called Kar in Turkish. Kar means snow. So this is so essentially it sort of it's about a poet in exile, a poet called Ka. He's just simply called Ka. And he's been in exile due to his literature and the anti-establishmentarian stance and so on. And he's been in exile in Germany for more than 12 years. And at the beginning of the novel, he comes back. I mean, he sort of nominally is come back to sort of, I mean, he's also a journalist. He's nominally come back to observe the local elections in a certain place called Kars in Turkey. But he also wants to sort of look at. So there's apparently a lot of during that time there were a lot of suicides of young women. That was sort of almost like a alarming number of suicides. Not an isolated episodes, but almost like huge number of suicides happening. So he also wants to understand why that's happening, and of course there's also probably also the personal motive. He wants to sort of meet a woman he once knew and so on. Now it's not clear why there are why all these why so many young women are taking their lives. But one sort of dominant theory is that this is because they've been asked to take off their headscarves, basically. So I mean, what is sort of it sort of makes certain counterpoints in this entire novel is, one is like, I mean, when we talk about sort of extremism, fundamentalism, and so on, it's almost always about people who are extremely religious and so on. But here you sort of see this sort of a fundamentalism coming from the other end of the spectrum, which is people who are like highly secular and liberal and so on. But then that they're forcing women to take off their headscarves and so on, and as protest, they're committing suicides and all of that. So Turkey, if you say again, it's a very unique country, right? Again, it's sort of torn between the east and the west, and there's constant sort of conflicts between the so-called modernism of the west versus the traditional values of the east and so on. And this is essentially in some sense the repercussions of some of the policies by when the new Turkey was born under Ataturk, and there was entire reforms around which basically push a big push for secularism and modernism and so on. But how does this affect while all of these concepts are great, they're still very, very lofty, right? I mean, they still sound like very elitistic concepts, but one of the sort of themes that comes not just in Pamuk's works but in a lot of other works as well, and there's also an argument that is put forward a lot, is um, the poor people, or the ones that are socially in the lower strata, find a lot of security, a sense of security with religion and the traditional values and so on, which you are certainly taking those away, and so on. So it's it sort of brings in all those themes, and extremely well written, and of course, other than the political themes, there's this. It's a pretty big novel, and a slow paced. The descriptions of the snow itself is some of that is exquisite, and then this guy, this poet is moving around. He hasn't been able to write anything in exile, but as soon as he comes back, within a span of 2 or 3 days, he has written 19 new poems, and the way he talks about it, it's not like he has written them, they're coming to him, the poems are coming to him, sort of a thing. And then he sort of imagines them to be sort of laying them on so the axis of snowflakes. Snowflakes have very interesting patterns, basically very regular patterns. If you if you see some pictures of it, so he sort of put them in different axes, like memory and imagination and reason and so on. So there's a lot of very interesting storytelling around how writing works as well, and of course all of this is set in a political context. It's sort of it's sort of a dark comedy and social commentary, and thickly laced with the politics of the time, but sort of making certain counterpoints, not the usual themes around the religious fundamentalism and so on, but there is probably an equally problematic outcome if ultimately it's not about religion or absence of religion and so on. It's about individuals, right? And and if it's not always about majority and minority. I mean, if you look at it, an individual is the smallest minority, and if you don't take care of individuals, then it could lead to all sort of problematic outcomes. So that's it's a very good novel, and that's one thing I wanted to talk about.
No, no. When was it written, Sanket? Any idea?
This was quite old. I don't remember, but this is definitely early 2000s or maybe that. Yeah. Yes,
Today's Turkey is completely different. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, today's Turkey is again, definitely, it's
more like an India in the making.
Yeah, I mean, it's and yeah, of course, the Turkey of and if you see the Turkey of the Turkey before Turkey, the Constantinople, and then how that was, and the influences there. Again, if I say that, I mean, of course, if you look at some of the other works by Orhan Pamuk, there's also written a memoir called Istanbul. That's also very interesting, where it traces the transformation that Turkey and Istanbul have been going through. Of course, he's most well known for his novel My Name Is Red, which is also in a sense a political novel, but that talks about that the Turkey of the
Ottoman era.
The Ottoman era and so on.
Okay, then I think it's time to end our discussion.
So if there's a minute, I'll just quickly read a couple of paragraphs. I mean, this is sort of relates to the political being apolitical and so on, and how there's a lot beyond politics. So this is, I was reading, I mean, incidentally, I was reading this essay today morning, an essay by Kundera, and talks about a small encounter he had with some friends, and where they start discussing this other author, Czech author called Bohumil Hrubal, who is considered by many as one of the greatest, and Kundera also considers him as the greatest Czech writer. So one of the objections that Hrubal faced was that basically that he was not very political in the sense of being very overtly political or taking sides and so on. But although it's like, if you look at it, most of books are very subtle in their politics. So one of the guys, one of his Kundera's friends says, while all this was going on and Hrubal was still publishing books, so how could he allow his books to be printed while his colleagues were forbidden to publish? How could he validate the regime that way without a word of protest? His behavior is detestable. Hrubal is a collaborator. He accuses him of being a collaborator to the government. So then Kundera basically says, he reacts with a rage. What absurdity to speak of collaboration when the spirit of Hrubal's books their humor, their imagination are the absolute opposite of the mentality ruling over us, trying to strangle us with their straitjacket. A world where a person can read Herbal is utterly different from a world where his voice could not be heard. One single book by Herbal does more for people, for their freedom of mind, than all the rest of us with our actions, our gestures, our noisy protests. The, so that's basically it's not about whether you directly talk about politics or not, but it's also about the kind of work that you do. And essentially what Kundera says later on is, so there's a fundamental disagreement basically. So and the disagreement is basically says that this between two kinds of people. It was a disagreement between people for whom the political struggle is more important than real life, than art, than thought. That is the one side. And people for whom the whole meaning of politics is to serve real life, art, thought. These two attitudes may each of them be legitimate, but they're irreconcilable. Right. So I just wanted to sort of end this with by saying that we're all bigger than our politics. And while I did say that we are inherently political, but then we're all also bigger than our politics. And I was just looking at some of the things in the chat and how how we cannot talk to our friends about and how we are always are we left or right and so on. So we are definitely much more than our politics.
Yeah, that was great, Sangeet.
It's true, and it actually, we think that it is this polarizing today. In today's scenario, we think it's because of social media, but that is where Tagore's book Gora showed it to me. With it's always existed. Polarizing views have always existed, but maybe there was more discussion that was possible, is what I
It's
think.
getting amplified now a lot.
Yeah, it's getting amplified with all the things that we have and all our echo chambers basically. So then we tend to and it doesn't have to be that way, because uh, ultimately it's about how much talk and how much discussion you can have with somebody who's completely different from you, right? So that,
Okay, then I think with that, we come to the end of the discussion. So yeah, it was a great session, guys. Thanks a lot for your suggestions. And yeah, hope to see you all again soon for the next meet.
Yes.
Okay then. Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone. Yeah.
Recommendations
Thanks so
and
much.
everything.
yeah, thank you so much, Anant.
Bye bye.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Don't we have to decide on the theme, or is it done later? It's not like I'm the only one talking. Okay, bye.